All right, well, it's 4:01, so let's get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our panel discussion, Voices from the Community, Why Access, Equity, and Inclusion Matter. My name is Jenny Tollefson, and I'm Stewardship Director here at Five Valleys Land Trust in Missoula, Montana. And we are so honored to host this discussion today about the importance of access to the outdoors and ways that we can all work together to make the outdoors safe and welcoming, inclusive and accessible to all people in the communities that we all live in and serve through our work. I'd like to thank Lisa Bickell of Field to Frame Interpretive Planning and Design for all her work to organize this panel, and also the Land Trust Alliance and the Montana Association of Land Trusts for supporting this panel, and also the two-day technical workshop that will follow on universal access, trail design, and construction. So there are over 100 of you out there, 105 now, and we're just thrilled with that participation. It would have been so nice to do this together in person, but we wouldn't have had such a great big group. So thank you all for joining us today. You can't see each other, and we can't see you, but from your registrations, I know that you are from cities and towns across Montana, and from, at my last count, at least 8 different states. And you do all kinds of things in your lives. You represent the general public, you represent all levels of government, land trusts, conservation, other conservation groups, community organizations, businesses, the public health sector, universities, and more. So it's really fantastic that you all took the time this afternoon to come. If you come up with a question during the panel, please feel free to type it into the Q&A box on your screen. And we're going to try to save some time at the end to answer a couple of questions. So I just wanted to tell you, I've been really excited about this panel and the workshop that's coming up this week. I'm also a little anxious because of Zoom and COVID and all the extenuating circumstances. And so I've been getting up early these past few mornings and going outside and going up on Waterworks Hill. For those of you who aren't from Missoula, it's a hill from, when you're up there, you can look down on the whole city of Missoula and you get this great perspective on all the trails and parks and open spaces that we have in our community. It's quite a gift. We know that these are places that are really important for our people, important for us to connect with nature, connect with each other, to take care of ourselves, our mental and our physical health. I know that's certainly true for me, and that's why I went there these last few mornings to clear my head and think about this event. And I feel so much better when I've spent time outside. But what's not evident from the top of Waterworks Hill is that not everyone has the same access to these places, and that just assembling a great system of open space lands and parks and trails doesn't mean that everybody can go to them. And I'm very aware that the fact that I can climb out of bed in the morning and go up to Waterworks Hill has a lot to do with the fact that I am a white, able-bodied person who can make the choice if I have the energy and the time and the inclination to go to these outdoor spaces. And there's a pretty good chance that when I get there, I am going to feel safe and comfortable and welcome in those spaces. So it makes me think about the consequences of inequities in access to the outdoors. And those consequences, I think, have come into even sharper focus in the last months. The COVID-19 pandemic is a new experience for us, and going outside has been one important way that we've been able to cope with the pandemic, but this is a powerful medicine that is not available and accessible to everyone. Racial profiling and racial violence are not new to us, but now we have all witnessed how race affects access to and also enjoyment of the outdoors. So we hope that today's discussion can inspire a larger conversation about how we can make access to the outdoors safe, welcoming, accessible, inclusive for all people. It's a big conversation. We're going to start it today, and we're thrilled to have 4 panelists with us who are so kind to take the time and share their own stories about access to the outdoors. Our panelists are Chris Clasby, who is a licensed clinical, not cynical, social worker and works in disability human services at Summit Independent Living here in Missoula. And I'm not going in order on the slide here. Ashley Ostheimer Hilliard serves as vice chair of the Missoula Food Bank and Community Center Board of Directors, and she's a research analyst with the University of Montana Center for Children, Families, and Workforce Development. Alex Kim works in racial justice for Empower Montana, and he's a founding guide of BIPOC Outdoors. And Tom McDonald is a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and Tom serves as division manager for the tribe's fish, wildlife, recreation, and conservation programs. Our panel will be moderated today by Donna Gockler. Donna is director of Missoula Parks and Recreation, and she is an avid user of Missoula's open space system. I know this firsthand because I often see her out on the trails in the early morning with a big smile on her face and her cute dogs. Donna cares deeply about this issue. She's committed to advancing equity and inclusion in the Parks Department here in Missoula because she believes that access to public parks and open space is a basic human right. And so with that, I'm going to pass it on to Tom McDonald, who is going to talk to us for a minute and give us a deeper sense of the place where we are gathering today. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank all of you for participating this afternoon. It's a wonderful topic and deep to my heart, and of course my livelihood and my family's history. So I know many of you are from Montana. A lot of you are centered in Western Montana, and some from out of state. But as being a member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, it's my obligation to talk a little bit about our native people here in this landscape that of course have been here for tens of thousands of years and treaded upon the entire landscape that most of us utilize every day or look at or work on and sometimes take for granted, which I hope we don't in the future. So the tribes, ranged all over Montana and primarily Western Montana, and as the advancement of settlers came and Europeans started moving more towards the West, we ended up in a treaty era period with the United States government. And so here in Missoula, just not too far in the lower part of the Missoula Valley, there's a place called Council Grove. And in Council Grove in the mid 1850s, the leaders of the local native people, which are the Bitterroot Salish, the Upper Pend Oreille or Kalispel and Kootenai people, those leaders met with the U.S. government leaders and basically in the treaty negotiations secured and reserved a homeland of 1 million acres for about 25 million acres of ceded lands, but also secured access to all of their landscape that they have used for tens of thousands of years. And so they assumed that in the treaty negotiations that the trails that they'd used to earn a livelihood or seek spiritual, cultural values and restoration were always going to be available to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on, because the treaty was for in perpetuity. So they understood very little about land ownership, or that somebody could have individual property. They understood that the United States government would hold these lands and their members would always have that access on those trails and horse roadways and water courses that they've used. They didn't understand that there could be this individual privatization of property. And so there was a significant loss once the homesteading started really happening. Tribal members weren't allowed on certain places where their family, if you can imagine being a Montanan for 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, to think of a family that has 30 generations. And they may have gone to some place to dig Bitterroot, or their trail to go to their favorite fishing hole on Lolo Creek or someplace on the Bitterroot or anywhere in Montana. All of a sudden that access was blocked by private lands and private landowners. So it's something that was a hard hit for the indigenous people here. And so a workshop like this and any action that we take for adding additional trails or bringing public access back to a place that doesn't have any, certainly there's going to be an opportunity for tribal members to restore that connectivity to their history and their family. And it's a healthy thing to do. So much more of a sense of place for them. And I'll talk a little more about language and more that we can offer for when we build trails, and the more we can get out of that trail network or places along it and learn from the environment, from the animals and the plants that might be in that area, or just the history of what occurred there maybe 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago that's not available today. So all those things are just fantastic to do. And I hope that a lot of you today that are on the Zoom seminar share those feelings with me. So thank you, Jenny, for the opportunity to say a few things.
Thanks so much, Tom. We really appreciate it. We're going to go into just a few terms today to help everybody use the same language, if you will. My name is Donna Gockler. I'm the Director of Parks and Recreation. And working in Parks and Recreation has been a lifetime passion for me. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. So today we hope to learn more about the concepts, explore some of the barriers to the outdoors, hopefully generate some ideas that you can implement yourself, and then inspire a bit of collaboration, because we know that working together, we're able to achieve so much more. We have some assumptions about our audience today. Jenny shared with you some of the demographics, but we pretty much assume that you have a significant passion for the outdoors. You believe in the benefits that are derived, and that you really want to increase the opportunity for others to share that incredible experience of the outdoors. And so that's our assumption about who you are today. We know that we're all much more complex, and there's much more that goes into that, but that's where we're at today. There are, and I'm going to move some screen. When we talk about access, we're really talking about equitable access regardless of ability, experience, or dimension of diversity. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about the differences in people. When we talk about inclusion, we're talking about making sure we hear share the power, if you will, hear the voices, change our culture, change our organizations for the better. And equity is really what we're going for. We want to see results from that policy, from hearing those voices, from changing our practices, so that all people might experience the great outdoors. We're going to share this PowerPoint with you, and just for, I guess, a foundation to begin from. When we think about the outdoors, we're really talking about the outdoors literally right outside your door. It might be time on your patio, outside the deck of your apartment. It might be that hike in the woods, that mountain peak, or a visit to the playground with your kids or grandkids. When we talk about diversity, again, it's the differences, but it's also understanding some of the ways that we are the same. I think too often we focus on how we're different instead of thinking about how we're really the same. There are 5 primary dimensions of diversity, which are really difficult, if not impossible, to change. There are ethnicity or race, and I've provided a link for you to learn more about BIPOC, Black and Indigenous people of color. We are different by physical cognitive abilities and qualities, and those things can change during time, during our lifetimes, but they may also come at birth. Age is something we all experience regardless of our color or ethnicity, sex or gender. And then sex and gender is really about male and female and where we are on that continuum of masculinity or femininity. And sexual orientation and identity is really about understanding the LGBTQIA plus and what that means and how it affects us in our daily lives as a result of our identities. Inclusion is about removing the barriers that deprive some people of the opportunity to fully engage. We want to foster a sense of belonging. We do want to celebrate our differences, not overcome them. And really, we should be intentional about our inclusion. You know, it's not enough to open the door or to open the trailhead, throw open the gate or throw out the welcome mat and say you're welcome if people don't truly feel safe and they don't feel that it's a space for them, intended for them. So when we talk about equity, we need to recognize that barriers, isms do exist. We don't all start from the same place. And what equity should really be about is equal opportunity to experience the benefits. And so I feel like these models, these pictures do a good example of that. If we're being equal, which is something I've worked in government for many, many years, and we were really trained, you need to treat every taxpayer, every resident, every guest the same. Well, if I treat every single person the same, we're giving every one of you the same size bicycle. That may not work for everybody. We're different sizes, we have different abilities, we have different needs, we have different places we want to go on those bicycles. The same number of bicycles, but the bicycles fit. Another example is the fence with the ball game. If I have 3 boxes of resources and I distribute those equally, we're not all watching the same game. But if I distribute those boxes in a way that create equal opportunity to receive the benefits, I now have accomplished equity. And again, we'll be sharing this with you and you know, use it the way you like, but I felt it would be helpful and important to get a chance to have some common language. So with that, what I would like to do is another warm welcome to our guests. Oops, sorry about that. And so I'm going to start with Chris today. And we would like each of our panelists to share a personal story through an event or experience that helps us understand your passion for diversity and the importance of access to the outdoors.
So, thank you, Donna. Yeah, my name's Chris Clasby, and I'm from Missoula here, and I've had a lifelong passion for doing things outdoors. It's just always been kind of who I am. I grew up in a family that did things outdoors, hunting, fishing, camping. It was part of my childhood growing up, and so then became part of my identity and how I engaged with people as I got older and started branching out a little bit on my own. And so it just, I never thought about anything other than doing things outdoors. It just was a part of who I was and something I enjoyed.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Alex?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Kim. My pronouns are he, him, his. And yeah, I'm a first-generation Korean American, and I moved out here 5.5 years ago to Missoula, Montana. And you know, I didn't see anyone that looked like me. I saw a lot of mountains, saw beautiful rivers, and a beautiful space, but I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And coming from Maryland, I came from a very diverse community, and you know, much like anywhere else, you know, that you move, you want to find your community. You know, you want to find people that look like you, people that do things that you want to do. At that point, I was just very interested in the outdoors with not a lot of experience. And I have to give credit to just all of my amazing friends and my mentors who have taken the time out of their days to teach me and to nurse me into the outdoors, essentially. But it was all white people, and that's not a problem, you know, at all. I'm so grateful for that. But I realized that there was a lack of diversity, a lack of leadership that were people of color within the outdoor industry, within the environmental studies, you know, and just within, and even had to do with the outdoors in Montana. And so I decided to start and guide and facilitate a BIPOC outdoor group. And that's through in Missoula Parks and Recreation. And I'm extremely grateful to Missoula Parks and Recs for that opportunity. And that opportunity has just really helped me to grow as an individual, but also to grow this passion for the outdoors and to understand that there are inequalities, and that through acknowledging those inequalities that we can come together as a community to like see the outdoors through our own lenses. And we all have different lenses that we bring, and being able to share that experience and to see other people experience the outdoors through their lenses and in a space that they feel safe and with a community that they feel comfortable with has really given me a lot of joy. And that is a big reason why I'm extremely passionate. And, you know, I think with the outdoors, it's joy, it's connection, it's the earth. It's something that, you know, we live and breathe and walk and take part in unintentionally and intentionally every day. And so just thinking about that. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Ashley, would you be willing to share your story with us?
Yeah, my name's Ashley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So in 2016, at that point in my life, I was a single mom to 3 kiddos. I was putting myself through school full-time, working part-time, and really just living in poverty. It was tough. It was hard. And I learned really quickly that one of the only things I could consistently provide for my kids was being able to get outside. I was really fortunate that I had a reliable vehicle, and I always had enough money for gas to get us out on a trail, to get us outside where we needed to be. And being outside was free. And it was free because it didn't cost any money. But it was wide open space for imagination for my kids and for me to take a break and to have a portion of my day that was stress-free also. At that time, I had an infant, a preschooler, and an elementary-aged kiddo. So I needed access to stroller-friendly, mom-chasing 3 kids-friendly, or bike-pulling trailer while wrangling 2 other kids-friendly places to play. I tried to make an adventure out of finding new spots. I would tell my kids that part of the adventure was finding a couple places that may not work for us because it meant finding our sweet spot was going to be that much more rewarding. We put miles and miles on the Missoula Trail system, and when we needed more stimulation, we played at the parks in Missoula. And the parks to us always felt clean and safe. And again, it was kind of an escape from the stigmatization that we faced in other areas of our lives. So today, getting outdoors is still our reset from having a hard day or even a good day in this new kind of virtual, remote, learning from home experience. Getting outside is that reset that we really need to be able to recognize that while so much is out of our control, we can still go out, look up at the sky, rain or shine, take a breath, ground ourselves. And for us, being outdoors is where we find our peace.
Thanks, Ashley. Tom.
Well, you know, I'm blessed being born and raised here in Western Montana, and growing up on a family ranch and having lots of brothers and cousins and elders in my family, my great uncles, all telling great stories of the outdoors. And as a youth, being able to go up into the Mission Mountains all the time, spend my summers up there, just to that connection to the outdoors and observing fish and wildlife. It's just part of my soul. So I can't imagine existing without being able to do exactly what Ashley said every day. So it certainly is it's a beautiful place, and I just can't imagine not, you know, just taking everything that we have here for granted and not being able to go out and do it and protect it and have it for my grandchildren. So it's really close to my family. It's close to me. So I guess I can't put a lot of words to it. It's just me.
Thanks, Tom. I think all of us, and probably all of you listening in, have that same sort of intrinsic feeling or value when you're in the outdoor space. I know for me, growing up as a child, very young, I had my mother tell me, I think I was about 5 years old, that she would never ever discipline me again by holding me inside, that was sheer torture for her all day long. And I think I've held that all of my life as well. Our next question gets a little bit more at barriers. And so I wanted to open this up with a story related to my own experience with barriers, both policy and physical and social political. As a Parks and Recreation leader and a member of the LGBTQ community, I was asked a number of times early in my career, regardless of my performance, to leave. That I was bad for kids, I was bad for families, and there was nothing I was more passionate about than kids and families and seeing them outside. And so when you experience some of those kinds of things, and I had the ability to pretend, if you will. I wasn't a person of color. I didn't have to hide that. And so I can't imagine what it's like in challenging times when it's clear to others that there may be some reason to discriminate. And then through my career, I've had so many opportunities to introduce people to the great outdoors, regardless of where that is, a park, a trail, taking people on their very first backpacking experience and finding what it's like to rely on everything in a sack for your survival. And one specific story to a barrier that I want to share with all of you is we had recently opened Splash, Montana, which is a 5-acre public water park. And I was motivated to let Missoula have this experience because I wanted ways to keep kids active and intrigued and engaged. And it was so wonderful to see kids running up and down the water slides instead of eating junk food. But one of the stories that got closest to my heart was when a mother came up to me, literally sobbing with happiness that her 11-year-old son, for the first time, was able to swim with his 11-year-old cousin because of the zero depth entry and the inner tubes that they could float on and enjoy the same experience together. And so I want to move on to Alex and have you please share an example of a barrier, physical, policy, social, political, that has prevented or at least reduced your or someone you know full access to the outdoors. And then what might have been a simple change that would have allowed you to experience all of those benefits.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you for sharing your story. Yeah, I feel like a barrier, I would say it goes along with policy in the sense of hiring. But before I get into that, I want to say an actual tangible barrier that I experienced when I first moved out here was access to information, access to gear, access to knowledge, and most importantly, access to ethics. I understand, or I came with an understanding that land is important and that spaces are important to respect and to honor. And coming to a new space and not knowing what is the right place, what is the right thing to do, where is the right places to go. I understand that there are places that I cannot access, whether that's private you know, or a seasonal closure, or what our gate at the road, whatever that may be. I just didn't have access to that information. And I thought that that was kind of an immediate barrier that I faced when I first moved out here. And I think that there is a lot of fun and enjoyment in learning about those barriers, or learning how to overcome those barriers by looking up, you know, the Missoula Parks and Rec's website, or the Montana FWP website, or whatever that may be, that holds a lot of that information. But I think that, you know, if you're not raised within this community of the outdoors, it's really hard to find that information. And it's really hard to know whether or not it's the right information, because it's just something you're seeing on the internet, you know. And I'll be honest, I didn't even know what a game warden was, honestly, until I came out here. And I was like terrified. I was like, what is this person that has so much authority? Like, what's going to happen if I meet them in the middle of the woods and I don't know where I am, and I don't have the right gear or the right license or whatever I need? And it really was a barrier for me. And then moving on to policy, I feel like, I think access to not just information, but access to opportunities. I think that a lot of folks in this room, or within this conversation here today, are within positions of power, and you know, have a lot of leadership. And I think that when you don't see a lot of people of color within those same seats of power, it becomes a barrier, because you want to see people like you know, in those spaces, speaking for those issues, and being able to represent those issues in a manner that is relatable. And I know that that's hard to do, but I also know that within policy and hiring practices, those are things that can change, because a lot of hiring practices, from a lot of research that I've done at a lot of land management, fish game, whatever it is, hasn't been updated in a long time when it comes to ethics, hiring practices, and et cetera. So I thought those were some barriers that I had experienced. And a quick fix, you know, I think access to information can always be better. And I think that, honestly, I think Parks and Rec did an awesome job, especially with COVID, like being able to walk on a trail and see a sign, and it's just so simple, but seeing that, it's such a good reminder that, like, you can make immediate changes to make a community have access, and to make that access safer for everyone. And so I think that is a barrier that Parks and Rec did very well. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah.
I want to remind our guests, our audience, that you're welcome to submit questions via chat. And we're going to go on to the same question. Ashley, can you share with us some of your experiences related to barriers, physical policy, that really reduced or had impact as far as you receiving the full benefits, and how they might have been fixed, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a community advocate for improved systems for families supporting young children in Missoula for several years. The negative stigma that I faced while applying for services that I qualify for was so demoralizing. There were occasionally people in application offices who treated me like an equal, who were willing to look me in the eye and have friendly conversation. And then there were people, you know, when I was there for other appointments, that they were distracted. They didn't want to. I was just another piece of the puzzle for them. I was a project to be worked on, and I didn't feel like a person with a story or a background. I noticed that I spent a lot of time feeling like I had to justify who I was and why I was there, because I felt bad or wrong for needing help. And I knew that feeling was probably rubbing off a little bit on my kids as well, that they were seeing their mom feel like I had to justify what I was doing with my life. And even in preparing for this panel, I tried really hard to leave that piece out, that for the purposes of this panel, I'm an advocate, and that's all. The rest of my background doesn't really matter. So my most memorable experience, and then I'll connect it back to the outdoors, but I was applying for assistance with a local resource in the middle of winter. at the time I was living in the Bitterroot, where I was born and raised. I drove into Missoula in the middle of a snowstorm for this appointment. And I realized after the fact that there was actually an office in my hometown that I could have gone to. I was about 20 minutes late in Missoula. I had my kids with me. I was stressed out from the roads, and I was told that there was no way I could be seen because I was 20 minutes late. And I needed the services that they were offering. And so I said, I'll wait for cancellation. There's really no point in me going back out on the roads because they're treacherous anyway. So I'll just hang out and I'll wait. And they kind of shrugged and were like, well, maybe. And I said, please, I'm okay waiting. And so I did. I waited for 90 minutes with my kids. And then when I finally got back to have my application reviewed, I was scolded. I was told that I should have had more self-respect and be on time. And at that point, I really hit my limit and I completely broke down. And I shared my story about how I was in that office with my kids. And I apologized over and over and over again because I felt so wrong for being there. And I'll never forget the look on the interviewer's face at that moment. It was like they were seeing me for the first time as a person and somebody with feelings and a history, and that realizing that life was complicated and that I was a human, just like they were. So they stopped and they apologized, and then they apologized again at the end of the appointment. And then it was a few years before I saw that person again. And when I did, I'm not sure that they recognized me or remembered that interaction. And now I work with them fairly often, and I've never brought it up. It left a huge impression on me to always, always, always be respectful and never assume or lecture somebody else, because you just don't know. So what does that have to do with the outdoors? Because we are all wanting to be able to use the outdoors. There is a piece of us that feels connected and desires to be a part of those resources that are right in our backyard, that are the trails that we can get to. And not everybody can get to them, especially pay-to-play activities, especially activities that require equipment. Just because most of us take for granted the fact that it's easy to get outside doesn't mean that it's easy for everyone. So when somebody's asking for help, whether that's through a scholarship program or because they qualify for assistance because maybe they have Medicaid and that's a pre-qualifying eligibility for a discount program that you offer, please remember that everybody has a history and purpose, and that we need to keep that in mind and don't pass judgment because we're all just trying to get to the same place.
Thank you, Ashley. Tom.
Yes, I'm going to have to kind of go back to my introduction there and talk about the history of the landscape and the people. When I first started working for the Confederated Salish-Kootenai tribes 40 years ago, just about, at that time, the demographics of the tribes were extremely low income. I think the average income was around $10,000 a year or less. Unemployment rate was, I think it was 60%. Just, and actually that was a good stats. Those were good stats for an Indian reservation in Montana. But so subsistence use and cultural practices were, and still are, were paramount in those folks' lives to be able to continue to do that. And so I heard all these stories about how one family may have gone to this place to go hunting and ran into a game warden, state game warden, or a Forest Service ranger or something of that nature, and were stopped because they were ignorant to what the indigenous people here had reserved for their use with the Hellgate Treaty of 1855. So they were stopped and they had to, some of them were cited. The tribes had to protect and and were able to enforce those treaty rights through lawsuits, successful lawsuits. And so that was a pretty common thing, and it was also in private land where someone may have, as I mentioned before, been to a place to gather huckleberries or bitterroot or some other medicinal plant, and it was private ownership, and then all of a sudden, the owners changed, and the person who was sympathetic to that use in the past wasn't there no more, and a new landowner was. And so that caused us to look for, a tool to be able to acquire those real sensitive places and look for, easements or acquisition of properties that were tremendously important, whether it was Kootenai Falls or some other place where it was really important for us to protect that access to it. So that's just kind of heartbreaking. And it goes back to a long time ago. I don't know if many people have ever heard of the Swan Valley Massacre, but that was the Ponderay family for generations that gone over the Mission Mountains and hunted over in the Swan forever. And then after the state of Montana first started to manage fish and wildlife and hired game wardens, game warden over there in the Swan encountered an encampment of Ponderay Indians and basically assaulted that family camp, and it killed all the men, killed all the women but one, and finally the woman was able to shoot that warden and put him down. But only survivors were one woman and some children out of a large group. All they were doing was practicing their indigenous rights that they had secured for time immemorial. So that stuff is really important to try to restore and protect, and just really hard cases. So we strive to do that all the time and try to maintain that access and increase access and lessen that ignorance with people. Information is power and knowledge, and the more you know about what your rights are for everybody and anybody on any landscape, the more you're empowered to maintain and protect and enhance those rights. So that's my story there.
Thank you, Tom. Chris?
Did you say my name, Donna?
I did. I'm sorry, Chris. Yes.
I didn't hear it. Anyway, well, so just kind of going off of what I was saying before, my experience when I was younger was basically, from my perspective, unimpeded access to the outdoors. I felt like I had the freedom to go and do what I wanted to do pretty much in public spaces and etc. And then the age of 18, I was injured in a motor vehicle accident and have since used a power wheelchair. And so a big part of the cathartic process of dealing with that situation was the discovery that there's still adaptive equipment and adaptive gear that I can use and still pursue the same types of things that I did outdoors as a youngster. And being able to do that created an opportunity for me to remain engaged in pursuit of a mutual goal with lifelong friends as well as new friends, and just enjoy that social setting and hearing stories and becoming part of an experience that is a story that will be told later. And that was such a huge thing for me. But I guess then I did start to experience some barriers that exist, and they're physical barriers, but not necessarily natural physical barriers. For example, just land management agencies and their efforts to prevent motorized vehicles from accessing areas that are open to walk in and etc. Have, by creating the barriers for motorized vehicles, have thereby created barriers that I can't get around as someone who walks can get around. And so, you know, many of you may have seen, you come to a Forest Service gate or a BLM gate where there's a public access point to public land, and there's a walk-through area on the side of the gate. And the most common thing that that I've seen is that somebody, whether it was the management agency or um, a recreation group, conservation group, has placed a large boulder of some kind in the middle of that walkway. And I totally get the reason that they did that. And I agree with them fully that, you know, I don't want to see people using motorized vehicles. But, you know, a long time ago, the federal government defined personal mobility vehicles like a power wheelchair as something that's no different than ambulation on public lands. And so, you know, it's really created that kind of barrier and interrupted that experience for me. And in fact, I just had the experience again 4 days ago, on July 4th. You know, I was basically sticking around home and just a beautiful day, and headed just across the valley of the window behind me to an area that I can see out that window, which is an area I hunted with friends on horseback when I was a teenager. And we would pack in and put up a wall tent and hunt and etc. And so it's really nostalgic for me to have this idea of returning back to that drainage and experiences some of the places that I did as when I was younger. And so we made our way over there and, you know, wound our way up to this trailhead, planning to go through in my power chair and just go beyond that gate and experience with my girlfriend what she experienced walking. And yet, due to a boulder on the side of that gate, I was unable to have that experience. So it's that type of barrier that I've experienced. I don't know, I guess, what a quick fix is, but I think there's something, and I think it starts with a process like this panel discussion and the trails training over the next couple of days, where a lot of people come together and share their perspectives and that kind of thing, and develop ways to create a more universal experience.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to remind folks listening in that it's the Q&A function, so I think we have a couple of questions coming in. And I am going to ask our panelists, this is sort of a rapid fire round. And what I would like to suggest is, I think a lot of the folks out there listening are wondering, well, what can I do now? What is some of that low-hanging fruit? How can I really make a difference? And so if we could go around the circle, and I'm going to go from Ashley to Tom to Chris and Alex, and very quickly, if you can share, this is one or two ideas that I would suggest you change as a land manager, a programmer, an agency person to really make a difference quickly. I think we might all be surprised how easy some of those things are. And really what it takes is a culture shift inside our own organizations of not doing things the same old way. So Ashley, can you kick us off with our rapid fire round?
That mine is a lot of what I've said already, that it's, and what you said, Donna, that it's a culture shift, that we need to build respect for every person that walks through the doors of our facilities, who comes for questions about how to use the outdoor spaces that we have access to. And then even beyond that, the next time that you're outside, you see a parent struggling with their kid, or you know, a dog gets off leash, before you jump to conclusion about what's going on, offer a little look of solidarity to that parent, and take a broader look about maybe that dog got off leash because the parent had their hands full, or maybe the dog got off leash because somebody's learning how to put the dog on leash, right? Like, we all were there. We've all been there. We've all made mistakes. And we need more compassion, and we need more ability to help us all see that we can make mistakes, we can be resilient, we can stand back up, and we can keep going. That's an easy shift that we could all do right now from this moment, being aware and taking that step back from the judgments that we make.
Thank you, Ashley. Tom?
Yes, you know, as a land manager, some of the things that we've done that signify that diversity and recognition of Indigenous people is to look at Native place names and to encourage that and feature that in everything that we do. So when you drive Highway 93 up through the Flathead Indian Reservation from Missoula, or south from Kalispell, you'll see Indian names on the highway. You'll see different names and the meaning of those names. And so we do that on any interpretive trail we put up. We do that as much as possible to recognize those Native languages, make it welcoming to the Native people, to utilize that as saying, yes, you know, this is a place that is looking at that and understanding that and maybe learning from that long-standing language and place names where you can learn things. We also, anytime when we acquire something, we look at how can we build that in that public access right away. Because there's one thing that I can say is that we do not have enough, and that we've exceeded our carrying capacities in a lot of places that we all enjoy. So we need much more recreational access and trails and pathways and roads, far greater than what we currently have. So anytime we do an acquisition for a private landowner or an easement, we look at how can we build that access into that property and that immediate management of that property. So it's a win-win.
Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Chris?
So for me, I would hope that in the development of any policy or any trail or any access area, that from the very, very beginning discussion and planning stages through the process to completion, that there's inclusive, broad input from the greatest number of people and perspectives as possible. And, you know, it's great to get a perspective in the middle of something, or to look back at the end and say, so how did we do, or what do you think? But something's not truly going to represent all perspectives unless it starts from the beginning. And so, you know, I would hope that an active effort to engage as many people as possible and include them along the way would end up in something that's optimal for as wide as number of people as possible.
Thank you, Chris. Alex, what are your thoughts?
I think we can take immediate action well, I know right now there's a lot of budgeting happening right now for a lot of organizations. And so by creating full-time positions of power that include people of color, I think that when you look at leadership, it's easy to do. Just look it up on the internet. You don't see people of color representing their communities. And I think that in 2020, people of color and the issues that people of color face in the outdoors do not need to be spoken. I mean, pretty much it's like a lot of white people talking about people of color's issues and how they can better something for someone else. But I think in reality, if we talk about it in that way and going along with what Chris was saying, you know, that shouldn't be acceptable. I think that we should really look at who is getting paid and who is benefiting from this system, and who this system is meant for, and all of those things. And in the idea of being inclusive, to think about full-time paid positions, so that when you have an issue of internal diversity where you want to grow and be more diverse, you have a person of color that can speak to that, and you have a person of color that you are respecting at that same level of power and privilege that many of you are sitting in today. And so I think that is that it's an immediate action. And I also feel like you can financially support Black, Indigenous, people of color programs in the state of Montana, because there are not many of them around. So those are 2 action items for you all.
And Alex, maybe something I could share that is, I think, fairly well known in the area of disability is just the phrase, nothing about us without us. And I think that works equally well with people of color and people of all perspectives.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Yes.
Great. I do think that we have so many opportunities as individuals in our community to no longer remain silent, to not engage is to not have an opinion or to support the same old way. And I think some of those changes that we can make can be really simple. Look at your forms. We've had families tell us that because we removed the child's sex from the form, that they feel much more welcome. For us, we've moved to all restrooms being all gender because it works better for almost every population. And it works better for families, and it works better for certain cultures and races. So there are really relatively simple things that we can do. And the crazy thing about something like making your restroom all gender is you actually maybe have to build less of them and still provide the same service. So just a couple of examples. I want to ask Jenny if we have any questions we should be considering today for the group.
We do have a question that came in for Chris. Chris, are there examples of motor vehicle barriers that would permit wheelchair, both motorized and non-wheelchair access that you have seen? Are there designs that are more effective than others?
There are, in fact, I think it was something that was developed by the U.S. Forest Service, but for the exact application that I was talking about, there's a type of a gate that it's a certain size, and it's got basically one entry gate and one exit gate. And kind of the way it works is that a person using a mobility device, and it's, you know, for a standard sized mobility device, whatever that is, and the user can go through that gateway and that first gate, which then closes behind them, and then the user could then turn like 90 degrees and then access out the exit portion of it. And that design was specifically invented and planned to be used to prevent the types of motorized access that are not allowed in public areas, which then begs the question of the cost of doing something like that, because obviously all projects have a budget, and, you know, to figure out how to use it as widely as possible is prudent for whoever's developing the area. You know, what I have seen in terms of cost is that a lot of times things are evaluated in a quantitative way, meaning what is the greatest number of people who are going to benefit from this, and they make people make funding decisions based on that analysis. Whereas I think, you know, it might be as important, or perhaps even maybe more important, to look at the funding process from a qualitative way, where, you know, a gate like I just talked about probably costs more than just an open gateway that people can walk through. But on the other hand, if people who utilize mobility devices and truly value that opportunity are able to access an area that would otherwise be blocked by a stone or something, that's just, to me, a more accurate evaluation of how the funding was used, I guess.
Thanks, Chris. Benny, was there another question you wanted to ask before we begin our wrap up? Did you get your mic?
Quite a few questions. Let's see. Does anyone have a comment about whether it would be possible to create some sort of accessibility chart for Missoula trails? For example, if somebody wanted to see if a trailer was stroller or motorized chair friendly.
Yes, there are. Again, there was a criteria that came out of the U.S. Forest Service. I think they call it the U.S. FORAG, Forest Outdoor Recreation Accessibility Guidelines, and it's a very objective way of measuring and evaluating a trail system that looks at the running slope of a trail, the cross slope of a trail at all points, the tread obstacles, or in other words, the surface of the trail. Let's see, what else? The number of areas of equal passage, so that if two mobility device users are going opposite directions on a trail, are they going to be able to pass each other? Or and so intermittently placed passage areas. So I would say, yeah, the U.S. FORAG is one thing to look at. And you know, when I worked at Montech, Montana's Assistive Technology Program, we went through a process where we utilized those criteria to evaluate a number of Montana outdoor places, and I thought it was pretty objective, accurate, and told people what they could expect when they get there.
Thanks, Chris. No, one other thing I share with everybody out there listening is there are an immense number of resources, and most people really appreciate being asked how to improve a situation. One thing we should never be afraid of or too prideful to do is to ask for help on how to be better, how to get better, how to make things more accessible with their equity. So I think what I'd like to do, and we will answer more of your questions. We may be doing that in writing. We will be following this session with a survey document. We'd love to get your feedback. You can continue to ask questions, and we will provide answers to those. For those of you attending the trails portion, we'd be happy to dive deeper. You'll learn more about some of those measures and how to determine whether or not a trail is accessible. What I'd like to do is, again, thank everybody for listening. Thank our panelists. I want to give them an opportunity to share one last statement that brings us all hope for a more connected and a more inclusive outdoor community. And then we'll do a final closing with our audience. And I was wondering, Tom, statement for our audience?
Well, yeah, I would just, since we're in the coronavirus epidemic and people have been, you know, sheltering in place for so many months and looking for things to do, hopefully close to their homes, so they're not out and about and exposing themselves or others to this pandemic, that opportunity to look for outdoor experiences close to your home, outside your door, in your neighborhood, in your town, in your own riparian area next to your house, whatever you can do to increase walkable communities or pathways, motorized or non-motorized, in and where you live. There can never be enough. And so, this pandemic has probably highlighted that shortfall that we all have right now. And so seize that opportunity right now. Seize that opportunity, because certainly this will continue, and we may have other things in the future, but it's just a good idea, just a good thing to do.
Thanks, Tom. Chris, you have a last thought, a message of hope for our audience?
Well, for me, it's real hopeful that there were like over 150 people signed up for this panel, and that there's a good number of people that are going to participate in the trail training over the next couple days. And so I just want to say thanks to all the participants who are here, because they're interested and they want to see things be right, and beneficial to more people. And also at the same time, gratitude to Five Valley Land Trust for their efforts to be so inclusive, and the work that they've done at several sites around Missoula, inclusive of many perspectives. And, thanks to Parks and Rec for your efforts to also include everybody else. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think with the attendees of this training, it's only going to continue.
Thank you, Chris. Alex, what do you have for us? Give us some last messages and things that can bring us hope for a more connected and inclusive outdoor community.
Yeah, I think, Donna, you said it earlier with the PowerPoint. It's not enough to just open the door. And so I feel like the door is open. So, let's not make that just the stopping point. And I think that we can figure out a way to make a house a home for everyone. And I think also to have empathy. I think what Ashley was saying, to be compassionate, like have empathy for one another. And when you're out in these spaces, to know that that space is special for everybody. And how we celebrate that space is different than everybody. And through our empathy for one another, we can see those differences, but we can also honor and celebrate one another and how we treat one another on those spaces. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Ashley.
Yeah, I was reading in a book recently, it was a research book all about data, but it made a really good point that what that needs to be changed, generally we agree on the what. We know what we want the end result to look like for the outdoors. We want everybody to be able to access it. We want everybody to be able to enjoy it. That what is something that we can all agree on. And sometimes the disagreement comes about in the why piece, or not the why, but the how piece. And I think a lot of times we get really caught up in the how, and it's important. The how is really important. We can't get from A to B if we don't know what the how is. But I think it's also important that as we collaborate and work together, that we take a step back every once in a while and acknowledge that more often than not, we really are on the same page. We want the same goals. We want people to be able to access them. And we need to acknowledge that if we work together, we can all have a piece in getting to that how. And be patient and be kind and show empathy. And then go out and do it, right? It's not enough if we just sat here for the last 2 hours and talked about it. We got to go out and do it now.
Thank you, Ashley. And I want to thank Five Valleys Land Trust and all of the partners who made this event possible. A really special thanks to all of our panelists who spent an immense amount of time advocating for a better, more inclusive more equitable access to that outdoors. And I want to challenge each of us, most of all myself, to think about what is possible. I really believe that people find their gifts in the out of doors. There are lessons that we learn by spending time both alone and with others, viewing wildlife, watching a bird, catching a fish, or for that matter, just bicycling along a trail. It's that time outdoors that renews us, that allows us to be more creative, to give back to society. So our challenge today, and I think each of our panelists said it well, we need to look back at our history and the people who first took such good care of our land. We need to look at each and every one of us as individuals and think about what's different between being equal and providing equity, as Chris mentioned. What makes it more accessible for me or for you makes it better for all of us. We're not doing any one of these things for any one individual person or person of diversity. This is for everybody. I also want us, in closing, to remember that while we are hopefully going through a significant change in the way we approach equity and inclusion and consider race and ethnicity and ability and socioeconomics and everything else, then we remember that people, white people do have fear that if we distribute things differently, they may not have the same things they once had. So when we're thinking about being empathic and considering everyone, we need to be empathic in every direction in order to achieve our ultimate goal of incredible access with inclusion that's equitable for all. Thank you.